Hi there, and welcome back to Mom in Mind. I'm your host, Dr. Kat, and this is another episode of Behind the Sessions and the last episode of 2023, if you can even believe it. For those of you who've been following along, I started Behind the Sessions this year to really give people a sneak peek behind the curtain of therapy. What, are people talking about in therapy? It, for some people, is like this mysterious process, or it's just very misunderstood, or there's some really old ideas out there about who goes to therapy, what types of people need therapy. And, all of this podcast is to really try and break down the stigma of mental health overall, but also the stigma around just getting help. It shouldn't be that hard for us to understand now, especially in this day and age, that people go through things and that help is okay. And not only okay, it's proactive, it's meaningful, it's beneficial. But unfortunately, we have the holdovers of, that we're supposed to be strong enough and pull ourselves through things and not need help for some reason. And I think that has really made us disconnected from a sense of community and the sense of connection that can really help us when we are in need. And we know, in the field for sure, that the more isolated that somebody feels, even if there are 100 people around, if they don't feel like they have connection to the people around them, it is devastating to their mental health. And that effect can be felt in a very real way, especially during the holidays. What's interesting is that, we have a drive to be connected to people for sure. But there's somehow these unseen, not talked about rules that we're supposed to be connected but not need or want anything from our connections. This is doubly true in the process of transition to motherhood and motherhood in general, in fatherhood, in parenthood, at least in sort of Western cultures. And the more that people have moved away from, far away from families for whatever reason, jobs or whatnot, the family unit isn't as close in proximity as they used to be to one another. And for some people, that's great. If you've had really difficult relationships, some people really try and get that distance. It's purposeful to try and have space, which is also totally fine. And, for people who have good connection, close relationships with their family members, then that's great. That for sure happens. And I do hear about that in therapy too, and how important the supports are, how important the closeness and connection of your parents are if you're pregnant or you've just had a baby, or your siblings. And those connected relationships really, really do help people get through. But whether you have a really close and connected family or you're in a family that you don't feel close or connected to, people that you try to not be around very much, the holidays create an extra amount of everything. And that is sometimes for good and sometimes for really difficult and in difficult ways. So I want to talk about the post-holiday slump. And in the last episode of Behind the Sessions, I talked about how to manage holiday stress. And I think it's important to note that just because the holiday is over doesn't mean you're not still impacted or affected by it for some period of time. Even if the holidays were fulfilling and joyful for you, it is a lot of energy output. Let's see, making lists, completing tasks, getting presents for everyone, making multiple trips to the store, coordinating gifts between, let's say grandparents and siblings and who's getting who what. And it's a lot to be the manager of this process. And that's just the things, the list, let alone whatever emotional stuff is coming up for you internally or for people around you. again, it can be joyful as well. It can be that your kids are getting their friends presents and they're really excited to do that. But you are the manager of that. I mean, if you really started to think about all of the extra things that you do or have done during the holiday season, it starts to add up to be a lot. And if you then also add in that you're managing a pregnancy or there's a newborn, or even if there's just, babies, toddlers, the management of that and their needs is layered into every aspect. And honestly, the more and more you think about it, the more and more you realize how overwhelming it is. And I'm not saying any of this to be, a Debbie Downer. Rather, I think it is important for people to remember context always, because the after effect of everything, all of the energy that you have put out, all the things that you've done, all the lists and things, items that you've checked off, do have an impact. And there's even more of an impact if you're dealing with really heavy emotional stuff. And in many families, the mother or the primary caregiver is the doer of the bulk of these items. And I am in no way suggesting that dads and partners don't participate and help out and pull their share. But societally, the pressure is generally on the woman in the household, to be taking care of a lot of these details. And if you're somebody who is at home or works from home or stay at home mom or parent, then you also become the default doer because you don't, have a 9 to 5 job necessarily that you have to clock in and clock out for. You have more flexibility technically. On paper, you do. But there's just so much more gets put on the kind of default doer in the household. Another layer that I touched on a little bit before is the gathering, the whether it's family gathering or friend gathering. There's just typically more of it during this time. And for people who have really challenging and conflictual relationships with their family, this can be extremely difficult to be around people who you maybe don't feel emotionally safe with, or who don't understand your boundaries, let's say with your pregnancy or with your baby or newborn. There's just so many more things you have to attend to when your boundaries aren't respected or listened to. And in therapy, in the therapy process, if somebody has a family or a family member that they're not connected to or feel very emotionally unsafe with or on shaky ground with, there is a lot of prep in our sessions for how to manage that. We could spend one session on it, or we could spend multiple sessions on the lead up just to a family gathering. As an example, some things that have come up is with the resurgence in COVID and illness being everywhere, essentially, is the mom being worried that the family members aren't going to be forthcoming about if they're sick or not, or let's say are not willing to mask if they have a little cold, and the mom has a new baby and is worried about RSV or whatever other illness, and concerned that a family member might not respect her boundary or question it or even diminish it, like, oh, don't worry about it, it'll be fine. So our therapy session is spent figuring out how to have a boundary, and how to have a boundary with somebody who is maybe not going to respect that boundary, and how to manage the guilt or shame or whatever other thing comes back from setting a boundary that you're not used to setting. There's another type of scenario where the mom has some family members who are coming in from out of town, and the family members don't necessarily agree with how the mom and dad parent. So let's say that the client and her partner, how they parent their child, the family members often come with thoughts or ideas on how mom and dad should be doing things differently and are not afraid to say so, or are very energetically like vacuums. They just, the family members take and take and take. And as a mom, if you're in this scenario, you might have to be figuring out how to protect your energy. Not that anybody's going to like physically harm you, but how do you not be depleted completely after their stay? And how do you set boundaries and limits, if not directly with the person you're having difficulties with, but how to set them internally, meaning like not taking people's stuff on, deciding for yourself ahead of time how you're going to respond to things so that you don't have to figure it out in the moment, which is incredibly stressful. We could be looking in therapy at how to set boundaries, what to say, how to say it, scheduling in downtime, strategies for bowing out of a situation that somebody doesn't want to be in if they're uncomfortable, how to talk with your partner ahead of time, what the exit strategy is going to be, or how to have like a signal across the room when you're starting to become overstimulated and you need like someone to come save you from the conversation. And certainly depending on your scenario and your situation, the strategies for how to manage this stress in the moment will vary and differ depending on what your needs are. So that's just some of the emotional and mental load that can come with an increase in socializing, family gathering, friend gathering, whatever it may be. So we have the lists, the things to do, the mental and emotional load, the relationships that you may be trying to manage. And then there's your internal process, your internal sense of self, and potentially your connection or relationship with your pregnancy or your newborn, or for people who've experienced a loss, how the loss of that child is incorporated into the holiday or not. That is really quite difficult. I mean, those are very complex emotional scenarios, and each person in therapy, there's not like a one size fits all for these kinds of fixes or how to manage all of this. But as I'm listing out these areas of stress with the tasks and the relationships and the emotional mental load and your internal process, how you are feeling, there's so much work that goes into managing all of this, whether it's on a conscious or unconscious level. It um, it has an impact. It affects you. There's no way that it doesn't. You would have to be a robot to not be affected or impacted on some level. And let's just for a second take all those stressors off the table. If you would just account for the increase in output that you have, the amount that you are doing, that takes a toll in and of itself. It takes a toll on your energy, maybe on your bandwidth. It might be harder to remember things. You could feel a little brain foggy. You could be irritable. That's a big one. So you put in all of this effort, all of this energy, and the holidays come through, whatever it is you're celebrating, and then it ends. The the decorations be need to be put away. The everything needs to be cleaned up. The go 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 busyness of everything stops fairly abruptly. And it's like, if you think of a car that's like driving super fast and you still slam on the brakes, like you put the brakes on, but the car is still moving. There's, there's still momentum. So sometimes what happens emotionally is that people feel out of sorts when things are over, because especially with like, the tail end of at least sort of American Western holidays, there's the October holidays, November holidays, December holidays. And that's a lot of time being spent in a sort of a momentum. And then when it stops, you could feel out of sorts. You could feel like you don't know what to do with yourself. Or if you are somebody who has learned how to cope by setting things aside, compartmentalizing, not paying attention to how stuff impacts you, paying attention meaning like conscious attention. You don't have some slow release valve throughout this period of time that helps you unload some of this emotional stuff. Then once all of the magic or noise or whatever you want to call it ends with the holiday, you might then begin to feel what you couldn't feel at the time, or what you didn't have the time to, or the bandwidth or energy. Sometimes when events are over, we then feel all of our feelings about it. And those can come in many different ways. Like people can be nostalgic, people can miss family. You could, be reflecting and realizing that you had some disappointments along the way that you're now feeling the hurt about. You could reflect and realize that you maybe wished you had done X, Y, or Z differently. And so kind of sitting with that grief that it maybe didn't go the way you planned or wanted to. And now that things are kind of over and you have that time to settle a little bit, reflect a little bit, think more, whether you want to or not, think about how things went for you. You can really start to feel feelings that you had to set aside. And sometimes those feelings can be grief. Sometimes it can be like sadness. It could be, regret or disappointment or anger at somebody or something that happened. Certainly for people who have really complex emotional relationships with family members, especially family members who tend to be emotionally abusive, when you come out of the fog of that, you can have a like, wait, what? Like, what just happened? Did that actually happen again? Did I allow that to happen again? Or did they do that thing they always do that I thought I would catch this time? And I can't believe they got one over on me. I'm just listing some of the things that people do talk about and do experience post holiday when they're in a more of a reflective state. And touching back on grief again, grief is so multi-layered and can come about in so many different ways. And I'm not necessarily talking about grief in terms of loss specifically, although if you've had a loss in the past year or several years, those feelings do tend to come up around holidays or those types of time markers like the new year. But you can experience loss of agency, loss of what feels like that things didn't go the way that you wanted it to, that the things you'd hoped for didn't quite happen that way. Because of the way the holidays are stacked, they end, and then the new year happens. And again, in kind of, as far as I know, mostly Western type cultures, but maybe globally now, is there's this new thing you have to start thinking about, which is the New Year's resolution. So you've been going through all of this stuff. You're in a post holiday slump. The new year comes around, and you're now supposed to gear up and decide what you want to change. And unfortunately, a lot of times they are pressured to be big overtures, things like that are connected to really emotional stuff too, like weight loss, which is hugely triggering for a lot of people, anyways. So you could be now experiencing an additional pressure. And I love calling stuff out. It's one of my favorite things to do. Calling it out in terms of, like I said before, remembering the contextual factors of your stress. Why are you stressed out? Well, you can list off and pick from the list of things I gave you, or maybe you have your very own list of things. But it's important to remember that, like, oh, why do I feel so bad? Or why do I feel down? Why do I feel low? How come I don't quite feel like I'm into stuff right now? Um, it could be related to all of this effort that you just had to put out for months. And now you're dipping into a state of reflection. And now you're dipping into a state where you don't have to be moving with that same momentum anymore. Um, and it can feel just like a slump, like you're down. So, understanding that, calling it out, making it known consciously what is impacting you is just incredibly important in your own process so that you don't feel like you're just sort of flapping in the wind with whatever comes at you. You understand, like, oh, I feel this way because X, Y, Z. And it's usually more than one thing. We are complex, messy beings, and so are our issues. And that's normal. So, one of the ways to cope with all of this, aside from listing or noticing the things that are impacting you or that could be impacting you, is to allow yourself time to recuperate. And that is an active process. That is allowing yourself, making time in your schedule, telling everybody, I am going to rest during this time on this day. You can schedule it, you can make sure everybody's prepared, or when it comes up and you really need it, you tell your partner or your family that they need to take over so that you can have some downtime. When we've been through a lot of anything, the stress rises and continues to compound, and the weight of that bearing down on us gets more and more. When the stressor ends, if it ends, then you find yourself coming back to baseline. But if the stressor ends and you're still up here, you know, up here in the high levels of stress, then getting down to baseline is much harder. Baseline meaning like how you normally function, what feels like your normal, and your more content or less stressed out place. So the process can be and sometimes needs to be really, really active. Like asking yourself, what do I need when you wake up in the morning? What do I need today? Do I need to, you know, sit in a bathtub for an hour? Do I need to go on a walk? Do I need to have quiet time? Do I need to meet up with a close friend and kind of vent? And you can ask yourself that every day. It doesn't have to be the same answer every day. It's just, you know, getting into a practice of checking in with yourself to see what you need and put your need on the list of things that need to be done or attended to in your life. If you don't make that a conscious and active process, life just fills in the gaps. It just does. So I really encourage you to make the time, create the time and space in your life so that you can come down from all that you've just been through, all that you've just done. And you don't have to do anything. You can stare at a wall. It doesn't have to be some expensive spa day or whatever. It can be just really mundane self care, like sitting outside in the sun if you happen to have sun where you're at, or, you know, going on that walk or talking to that person and adding in as much of that as is possible starts to help reduce the stress load that you've been carrying around and help bring you back down to what your baseline is. So you can reflect even right now, what are the things that help you feel restored even a little bit? Not full restoration, but what are the things, incremental, small baby steps of things that you do that can that you can begin to add into your day, week, month, however long it is, that can help you reduce some of the stress load that you've been carrying and get back to a place where you're not feeling the slump of that post holiday stress, and get you to a point where you're not feeling that post holiday slump in the same way that you were. And this can be small changes every day. So, this is fairly relatively easy self-care practice to install the first thing you do in the morning, even if you're kind of woken up by somebody or something, at a point in the morning, to ask yourself what you need that day, how you can add in rest and recuperation time into your day so that you don't continue to carry the weight of the holidays with you into the next few months, and to treat yourself with compassion and love and kindness, even if it's in very small ways. So I hope that this conversation has been helpful for you to just recognize what you might be carrying with you and to give you permission to not carry that anymore. Give you permission to take care of yourself in a way that's going to help you feel like you. And for those of you who are suffering with a perinatal mental health condition, this just makes everything even more complex. And I really encourage you that if you haven't yet connected with a perinatal therapist, to do so. It's totally worth it. Getting the help, getting the support is worth it for you, for your quality of life. It's really, really important. Like, quality of life really matters. You don't have to white knuckle it through all of this without help. And please do, anybody who can't quite get to a therapist yet, or you're not sure if that's what's for you, you can go to my website, wellmindperinatal.com, and go to the courses section and look through the courses that I offer that help explain some of the difficulties of the transition into new parenthood, and help you look and reflect to see if you might be dealing with a perinatal mental health condition and what to do about it. There are some really solid skills in there that can absolutely help you get back to feeling like you want to feel. I thank you so much for being with me. Until next time.